Okay, today we have a heads up sitting go for Stoxpoker, and our adversary today is none other than SNG legend DD Beast. He's an amazing sitting go player. He's won a ton of money, and even though he sat down first, this is a stars 225. We really wanted to play him, and the reason I felt that I had a pretty good edge against him was twofold. Number one is a winning sit and go, nine-handed sit and go player is usually going to have a tight aggressive strategy. And since I haven't seen him a lot playing these heads-up games, I'm guessing that he hasn't had enough time to really learn how to play the more loose aggressive style that usually wins in a heads-up game. The second reason I really like my chances are because this guy's playing like 8 other tables, and it's just real hard to adjust to your opponent and make smart plays in the particular situation when you're playing so many tables. I mean, in a sit and go, it's more mechanical, it's a lot more possible, but I think in a heads-up match, when you've got two clever players butting heads, the guy who's playing a bunch more tables really has a tough obstacle to overcome. Okay, we're not going to be folding our button at all. If DDB said checked, we would have bet. Maybe 25 or 30. He bet. I'm guessing he has some kind of a hand. Okay, Beast raises 3 blinds. We've got a very quality hand for heads up, and that's one reason we make the 3 bet. Another is because we expect him to be raising his button fairly often, and we want him to respect us. We want him to say, hey, if I come in on this guy's blind, he could easily 3-bet me. So having an early 3-bet is a pretty good thing. And 7s don't play very well out of position either, so we're very happy to just take it down immediately and hopefully send him a little message. Don't mess with us is what we want to say. Okay, we come in for standard c-bet. He check raises us big. I really think he's got the queen there. Almost certainly he has our king high beat. But this early in the match, I would absolutely not continue with the hand, and I would actually be kind of surprised if he didn't have the queen there. Okay, 4-9, kind of weird maybe that we're making a raise here, but we want to be playing all of our buttons, and sometimes a guy will begin raising a lot. If you limp on him, DD Beast could be that type of opponent because we know he's going to be playing aggressive, and because of that, sometimes instead of just limping, I'll come in with a small raise and kind of buy myself some stealing fold equity after the flop. And one thing here is, so we hit the 4, and our bottom pair is almost certainly good in heads up, but even if we had missed entirely and only had a 9 high, he would have to fold unless he had a pretty decent hand. Okay, we've shown strength before the flop, we make a standard continuation but after the flop, and he's got to respect that a little. 5 king is not the type of hand to play at all. It's junk. We limp from in position, out of position, we stump it. He folds to a small raise there with their low suited jack, and that's good to know because pre-flop, even with their small raises, and we're going to be coming in for a lot of small raises, particularly against a tight aggressive player, and we know that he could fold to them. So not only does that increase their chances of stealing after the flop and build a power we have position, but we could win immediately, which is good. And now literally to min-raise he folds. And that sounds so bad. I mean, even though he's getting 3-1, he's out of position. If he's got junk, he shouldn't be playing it. But some guys will always call those. It's good to know he won't. Okay, he'd raised his first 4 buttons. Now he folds a button. So he has some standards for raising, which is good. Okay, if he had checked, we would have bet. I'm slightly worried by this bet because I think he's kind of tight. I don't think he's going to bluff. If he's got a king, he'll usually have us so kicked. I'm just going to call. And I want to play a very small pot here, and I want to get to showdown. Against most guys, you'd want to bet here because there's a flush draw. He could have a better 2-pair draw, a straight draw, something like that. But our priority to play a small pot is going to trump that. And we'll just check behind. And against most guys, I would definitely throw out a small value bet here. I guess maybe I'm giving him a little too much respect because I think I'm going to check behind. But after his flop bet, yum. So I'm kind of surprised that he let out that flop with only a 10 high. Maybe he's a little more loose aggressive than we gave him credit for. We'll see. And after that, I think he played it well because he had to figure there's a good chance of him winning a showdown with his pair of tens. And he indeed got a cheap showdown with a hand that would often have been best there. So good for him. Okay, we raised to 2.5 blinds. And like I said before, I'm going to be making a lot of these small raises because I want to be playing just about all my buttons, and I don't want to be thrown off a lot of hands by big re-raises out of position. And he comes in for a raise that's not super big, and he's giving us close to 2 to 1 when we have position. Now, I'm definitely not going to re-raise him here because, again, I do have position throughout the hand, and I do have a quality hand. I don't want to risk it all. Maybe he's got pocket nines or something. Regardless, I'm not going to be re-raising him. Against a maniac who's constantly 3-betting, you could very well re-raise. I'm not going to do that here. I'm going to see a flop and hope to connect and outplay him. Okay, when he checks, this is one time when you should absolutely not bet. It wouldn't be a C-bet because he was the pre-flop raiser, and if he had bet, that would be the C-bet. We've got to be suspicious of this check. Okay, he's an aggressive player. He re-raises out of position before the flop, and now he's not checking. He's not betting this flop. That's very suspicious to me. Now, that's compounded by the fact that we have both a nut draw to the Broadway straight, as well as a backdoor nut flush draw. So we're definitely going to check behind and take a free card. If he checks the turn, we'll bet any two or throw out a bet of around 200. And now when he bets himself, we're just going to lay this one down. If he doesn't have an ace high beat, good for him. But I do think he had a speed. I think he was slow playing a monster, had some quality hand. Okay, he raises our button down to position. It's one reason why a lot of these times I'm coming in with the small raises with the trash hands, because it's more likely he's going to raise a limp rather than raise a small raise, re-raise a small raise. Okay, this is kind of an unusual play. What I'm doing here is he's been raising his button a lot, and this is a play that I call the small 3-bet, and you should only try this against a thinking player who's going to say, hey, he's raising me very small before the flop, and I think that means he has a quality hand. And the idea is that if you really hit it big at the flop and he hits good too, you have a good chance of busting him. And if not, he needs a very strong hand to continue because he's shown a lot of strength. And it's one way to slow down a guy who's raising his button a lot, is to come in with a small pot approach, yet a very aggressive one. Now in this situation, we've got a bet, of course, and we come in with our C-bet, and our pair of fives is very likely to be good in heads up in general, and you combine that with the fact that we've shown so much strength, and if for any reason he had played back at that C-bet, I would have laid it down because I think he would only do that with at least a pair of sevens or better. Okay, 10-9 off is about the weakest hand that I consider calling this with. I would not call with a 10-8. And I think that even Suda would make this a lot better. This is kind of a marginal call. Okay, 5-5 ace is a flop that's very unlikely to have hit him. He's raising his button often enough that it's unlikely he's got an ace, and also because there's already one accounted for, very unlikely he's got a 5. So I also think he would have bet more on the flop if he had the ace, because there's a flush draw as well as a low straight draw out there. And now if he checks, we're not going to bet out at that. Okay, he checks behind, and now we're going to bet the river. Unless we hit a 9 or a 10, we'll check it and hope to show down. But I think there's a very high chance he's going to fold to a bluff here. And this bluff is going to, if he folds anywhere near half the time, it's going to show a nice profit, because I think our showdown value is very low with the 10 high there. And I just think it's really unlikely that he's got an ace. He could also be worried that we've got a flush draw and fold something like pocket deuces, and this is a bet that is very unlikely he's going to call. And he could even suspect that we had quads or the full house with the ace. Okay, no way we can get involved in that one. And some of the fancier plays I'm putting on this guy, I'm really doing that because I think that I can assess the level that he's thinking at and up it a level, because he's probably assuming that our bets are relatively straightforward, basically that I have, in the range of what I'm representing, and he can't go at too high a level just because he's playing so many other tables. He's something like 8 tabling, and he is a good player though, and because of that, I really think that I'm going to be having an advantage in the reading battle. But against, loose passive opponent who's capable of doing all sorts of things, you don't want to be making these types of plays on him, because he'll just call you down with, a king high or something, and you really have to have a pretty concrete idea of why you're making these plays. And I hope I'm doing a decent job of expressing what I'm thinking here. Okay. So ace 8 is not a time. I'm definitely going to call this because he's raising his buttons so often that I think a mid ace is considerably above his range, and I'm getting 2 to 1. However, I really don't like the 3-bet here because I don't want to play a big pot out of position with a hand where if he really does have a hand, it's often going to be dominating ours. So I'm just going to call. And here we have another hand that's very unlikely that he's hit this flop, and so we come on with a bet. And we wouldn't do that maybe against a very loose aggressive opponent, but against a guy we suspect to be a little tighter, we'll bet. And now we're going to give up on the hand until we see that 8. And what that 8 says is that we really want a showdown, and we don't want a lot of bets to be going into this pot. So we're going to check, hoping he checks behind. If he bets, we'll call, unless it's something huge. 200, we're getting close to 3 to 1. We definitely have to call that bet. And okay, a lot of the time I would lead out here, figuring that he's very unlikely to bluff raise me. He would only raise if he had my hand beat. And the reason that I believe I'm going to check to him here is because I think that he might be concerned enough based on the pre-flop smooth call, the flop bet, and the action so far that there's a chance he would actually check behind a 9 or an unlikely 10. And because of that, I'm going to check it to him. And if he bets, most likely a call, unless it's a big bet. But we'll see what happens. He bets 450. Usually that's going to indicate a monster, or something like pocket nines, or I don't know, maybe a very unlikely 9-4 or an overpair, something like that, or it's going to be a total bluff. However, our hand is strong enough in heads up, this pair of 8s on a very raggedy board, and we're getting 3 to 1, so if we win close to 1 time and 4, it's going to show a profit, and the combination of those two, we've got to call. Wow, okay. He has the hand that I least expected. And what I mean by that is it only makes sense to bet. It's not to bet for value or to bet as a bluff. And he had neither. He had a hand with good showdown value. But if our hand is worse, then he may as well check because we're not going to call a bet anyway. And if our hand is better, it's very unlikely that we're going to fold it, getting close to 4 to 1. So an ace would be the hand I would least likely bet here, and I would gleefully check behind with an ace in this spot. And at the times I would bet would be if I had a really strong hand, or if I had a hand that had just about no showdown value, like a jack high or something. Jack high has minimal showdown value, but not much. Okay, in this hand, I think no matter what cards I'm done, I'm going to raise because he's just been shown bluffing, and I think he's going to want a hand or two to get his bearings back, and he's really going to need a hand to play right after showing down and losing such a big bluff. Kind of a general principle. I don't know anything specifically about DD Beast to indicate that, but it's what I've observed, and it's even something I find myself doing. You know, if I'm called on a big bluff, it's very rare the next hand I think, okay, I'm just gonna raise. It's, you know, psychologically it's a lot tougher. Here again, I notice that he's put me off a couple of my limps, and I want to play a pot. So instead of limping, I'm going to come in for a tiny raise and maybe get him a little suspicious. He checks, he'll definitely c-bet, and it's going to be real tough for him to call that without an ace or a 10. And also our 6 high has zero showdown value, and because of that, that's going to be a very profitable continuation bet. Okay, we're all trash. And once again, we make a small raise. We really want to play all of our buttons against him, and we've seen him raise us out of position a couple of times. He seems kind of keen on doing that, and so rather than limp or fold or make a big raise, we just come in for a tiny raise. Hope to make him a little suspicious. And he's really showing a lot of respect for his c-bets, which is great. Okay, it's pretty cool. I like that. So I'm going to be doing a lot more of that. Small raises and c-bets. Okay, 8 king, definitely good enough for a raise. I don't want to play a huge pot, but 2 above average cards in position. We come in for a small raise, takes it immediately. Now, I'm very suspicious by this limp. In 27 hands, he has limped before the flop 0 times, I believe. And I just don't think that he would do that unless he's got a monster, or at least the odds of him having a monster to me are sufficiently high that I'm going to play hit to win. And there's not too much you can hit with the deuce 7 off. 7 high flush draw isn't enough. And I would have only continued with that hand if I had flopped something really strong, like at least in my 7 or something. 7 9 of hearts, easily good enough for raising heads up. He 3-bets all in. We're not even getting 3 to 2. No way we can call that. This would be a time when, with a smaller raise, we might play, but kind of short stacked, weak hand out of position. Let's give it to him. Again, we want to be playing our button. So instead of limping or folding, make a small raise. And so far I've been playing a lot of pre-flop pots since that bigger pot, and a lot of them, one of us is raised and the other's folded. And I think that my edge is going to be more in the post-flop play, again because he's multi-tabling so much, but when his stack is that short, I'm content to chip away at him or do whatever I can. And at this point, he raises his button yet again, like he's been doing just about a vast number of hands, and a suited ace is strong enough that we can make a re-raise, and this is going to be putting us all in if he wants to play the hand, because we'd be pot committed, but a suited ace is strong enough where we can do that. And if he does, on the off chance of a premium hand, we're usually not going to be worse than about a 2 to 1 dog. And it may also decrease the likelihood that he'll be raising his button. Okay, this is kind of an interesting situation here, because one thing to notice is I'm almost positive that DD Beast, if we limp, is going to shove. And the reason that I'm sure of that is because there's the 10 BB rule, which says that once you have 10 blinds or fewer in effective stacks, so right now the blinds are 2550, he has an effective stack under 500, and when that type of situation occurs, you should play shove or fold all in poker. And I know that if this were a full SNG and I were to limp the button to him, he would shove any 2 cards, and particularly since not once have I limped and then defended one of his raises. So I strongly believe if I limp here that he is going to shove all in with literally any 2. And since this is going to become an all-in battle before the flop anyway, and my hand is considerably above average for heads up, I'm going to limp this, fully expecting him to shove all in, and call, expecting to have a slight edge. So it's a pretty unusual way to play this hand. A lot more common would be to make a small raise or just shove yourself, but I honestly think he's shoving literally 100% of hands. So if he has ace king, I'll feel like an idiot. Now we're looking pretty good. And he has ace six, so that was certainly a very legitimate shove. And let's take a look at Poker Office and, pardon me, Poker Stove, and see the math on this. Now, Poker Stove is a freeware software. You just go to pokerstove.com and you can download it. And what it does is it gives you pre-flop hand matchups. But you can also have one guy on the random distribution, which basically means how does your hand do against any two cards. So we're going to use that cool feature. And player one, that'll be us. And suits don't matter. We'll just give ourselves a king 7 off. And player 2 will have the random distribution. This means any two cards are equally as likely. And I think we're going to be a decent favorite. Okay. And we're 11 to 9. I actually thought it would be slightly higher, but that's a pretty solid edge. And if you can seize that kind of an edge and what's going to be a pre-flop all-in battle anyway, you should do that. And even with his ace, we certainly weren't worse than around a 3 to 2 underdog, and that's really a monster hand for heads up. And I think that's a pretty good spot to get all of our chips in. So that's going to conclude a fun heads up sitting go. And hope you guys enjoyed. Signing off.